in terms of these kind of EU regulations for the car manufacturers in particular, isn't it a bit of a case of that EVs are just better technology, right? That they're going to come into the market, it's more efficient, it's cheaper, it's zero emissions. And so these kind of targets aren't so important? How would you, from a policy perspective, react to that?
From a policy perspective, I would say the targets are very important.
How are the cars that are participating in your program, this fleet of vehicles, able to tackle grid congestion in these kind of high solar production periods?
Yeah. Yeah, so what's happening in the Netherlands is actually quite interesting. We are like in a kind of perfect storm, if you would call the energy transition like that.
Yeah, but a good storm, a friendly
and
storm.
it's a very good storm.
Inclement weather means there's an outage and you can power your home from your electric vehicle. There's too much solar in the local distribution network, and a fleet of cars can draw down that PV power, resolving congestion. And EVs plugged in at home can make the most of dynamic tariffs to charge and discharge in a grid-friendly way and make money for their owners. These are some of the emerging and exciting use cases for bidirectional EV charging. And it's our focus on the Smarter E podcast today. I'm your host, Jonathan Gifford. The possibilities for putting the huge numbers of batteries on wheels that are being added to Europe's vehicle fleet are immense, particularly as the e-mobility revolution accelerates. But while the possibilities seem endless and the promise great, it's also complex in terms of regulation, technology, and business models. So let's plug into these issues today on the podcast. My guests are Robin Berg, the CEO of We Drive Solar in the Netherlands, where trial programs are demonstrating how fleets of vehicles can super effectively resolve some of the grid congestion issues currently facing cities like Utrecht and Eindhoven. And what's particularly exciting is how quickly the We Drive Solar programs are scaling. First, let's get up to date with European policy, because bidirectional charging requires both standards and regulations to be brought into alignment so it can be adopted by EV owners of all types and all over Europe. My guest today is Adriana Fricke from Hubject, which simplifies the charging of electric vehicles through its e-roaming platform Intercharge, and it connects charging point operators and e-mobility service providers to provide standardized access to charging infrastructure. But before that, a quick note from us here at the Smarter E podcast. If you're listening or watching the pod for the first time, please do subscribe, follow, and leave a rating or review. There's a huge amount of disinformation online and across all platforms about solar, batteries, and EVs, and we're working hard to bring accurate info and expert voices to as large an audience as possible. It's the best way you can help us to share accurate information about the energy transition. And you can get in touch with us anytime at podcast@thesmartere, that's all one word, .com. That's podcast@thesmartere.com. Well, bidirectional charging, vehicle to X it's sometimes called, is extremely exciting, but it's also very complex. It involves technology, and importantly, it also involves regulations, policy. So it's great. On the Smarter E podcast today, we're joined by Adriana Fricke, who's the Senior Manager Public Affairs for Hubject. Adriana, thanks for joining.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, you know, I think one of the big headline issues in 2025 was the adjustment or the change to the EU's 100% emissions reductions target for car sales beyond 2025. Just how has the e-mobility sector more widely reacted to this policy change?
I think, first of all, it's very important to put things into context. So the CO2 emission standards regulation revision is part of a more comprehensive package. So the Commission released end of the year, so in December 2025, the automotive package. And obviously the industry was less excited to see that there is a flexibility on the CO2 emission targets. There was a 10% flexibility granted for car manufacturers. But I think it's also important to say that that flexibility has to be compensated by providing e-fuels or green steel. And also to say that part of the automotive package, we see actually a lot of good initiatives from the Commission in terms of the battery booster, the automotive omnibus with the small affordable electric vehicle car initiative, or greening corporate fleets. They're all initiatives that actually demonstrate that the future is electric and we're on a good pathway.
It's interesting you say green steel because, creating a market for green steel just in the broader kind of energy transition is incredibly important. But in terms of these kind of EU regulations for the car manufacturers in particular, isn't it a bit of a case of that EVs are just better technology, right? That they're going to come into the market. It's more efficient, it's cheaper, it's zero emissions. And so these kind of targets aren't so important. How would you, from a policy perspective, react to that?
From a policy perspective, I would say the targets are very important because we need a stable regulatory framework. So in terms of having policy clarity and consistency, I think that's a key element in driving, innovation in this space, in maintaining investment certainty, in guaranteeing consumer trust. So those all play into the bigger picture. Yeah.
Okay, so even though it's better technology, we still need these framework
I
settings.
think we are still going to see, moving the transition or the pathways is electric. That's undoubtedly so. But I think having, more flexibility granted or watering the ambition could potentially slow down the uptake. So I think that's where the risks lie into like freezing investments, into, diminishing consumer confidence. So I think we're going to move into that space because when we're looking at TCO, at other factors, we see this is definitely the better technology, but we also want to advance at speed, right? We don't only want to go in that direction, but we also want to move forward in the right pace.
And what do you mean by TCO?
Total cost of ownership.
Okay, yeah, indeed. All right. Now, you were just recently, a couple of weeks ago, in Strasbourg at the European Parliament. What was the purpose of that mission?
Well, the proposal of the Commission just sets the tone for the interinstitutional discussion. So now we're moving into the co-decision stage. So engaging with the Parliament and the Council is actually essential. So engaging with the members of Parliament during the plenary meeting, the plenary week was crucial because this is the stage where the Parliament decides who the rapporteurs is. Sets basically the tone for the discussion. So we had to send a very clear message to the policy stakeholders that, the industry has invested consistently. We have seen more than 200 billion euros invested in the EV ecosystem, and we want to have that certainty to further drive innovation and investment in this space.
Well, I started off this conversation by saying that vehicle to grid or bidirectional charging vehicle to home as well is incredibly exciting. That's my opinion. Of course, as an e-mobility provider or facilitator, Hubject clearly believes that's also the case. But maybe we should set out a little bit. What really is the potential, as you see it, for bidirectional charging in terms of enabling the energy transition?
The potential is immense, right? Because we're seeing not only in terms of theoretical concepts, we are seeing very tangible effects or benefits for the consumer, for the energy systems, for the service providers, in terms of integration of renewables, grid balancing, cutting grid costs. I think there were numbers that estimated that in terms of costs, we are looking at a potential of 11 to 29 billion euros grid savings annually by 2030. So I think that's very big numbers. And beyond that, I think also we are looking at energy resilience, right? Because in this geopolitical landscape, energy security also becomes, and energy resilience becomes crucial. We've recently witnessed the blackout in Berlin. We have seen, the sabotage to the energy grid that caused, I think, more than 40,000 households to be left, without electricity, communication, heating for more than 6 days. And I think there, those solutions in terms to vehicle to home, vehicle to grid could be a potential solution, because I think it's important to say that a car battery has enough capacity to power one individual household for 1 week or even longer. And in a multifamily setting, I think 19 houses during one night. So I think the potential is already there.
And in fact, they're mobile batteries, right? So you could potentially drive to another part of the city where there is electricity, charge up, and come back.
Exactly. So even
Wow.
longer than 1 week, exactly,
It
going back to,
it
yeah.
really makes us kind of rethink a bit about energy storage, having mobile energy storage, right?
Exactly, because with vehicle to grid, vehicle to home, an electric vehicle is not only used for mobility purposes, it's also used to provide grid services. So it's more or less a battery on wheels. It's charging, but also it can store and can discharge electricity to the grid or to the home.
And of course, EVs and just cars generally are stationary for the vast majority of their lives. We're going to hear a little bit more about a project that's making the most out of cars when they're stationary, and they really are stationary for, if it's a private car, something like 95%, which is a pretty remarkable figure, I
Exactly.
always find.
So we also have to look, at the potential that fleets can play into this space, right? Because again, that could be a new, revenue stream for fleets using, the stationary, potential when
Yeah,
they're.
absolutely, and that's precisely what we're going to hear about just after this. Now, we talk about Europe and we talk about framework settings in Europe, policy settings, but of course, Europe is not monolithic. There are many different member states, and each member state is very different. How are we going in terms of the different states? Member states of the EU, and what they're doing to enable or set the policies to facilitate bidirectional charging?
Well, in terms of member states, I think we see more progressive member states moving, at speed at this space. And there, I would signal out Germany, because Germany has been very active, in promoting smart bidirectional charging within the framework of the master plan for charging infrastructure, but also setting up what is called Coalition of the Willing, under the umbrella of the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy. Coalition of the Willing brings together policy and industry stakeholders, trying to have alignment. But also important to say, we are making extreme, progress at the EU level, because we also have a framework now in place, in alignment between the e-mobility and energy ecosystems.
Well, and I think alignment is important that you say that, because it's not only alignment between member states and getting those policies right, but it's also alignment between kind of the motivations between the EV makers, the charging providers, the grid operators, because they often have, or they can potentially have, conflicting motivations or drivers, right? Because to facilitate bidirectional charging, it does require some hardware changes when it comes to a wall box, a kind of charger, or when it comes to the EV itself. So how close or far away are we to bring those kind of priorities into alignment amongst the kind of industry players?
I would say, first of all, that is a very complex ecosystem, right? And it requires alignment across OEMs, CPOs, EMPs, service providers. But we are on a very good track. I think we've seen immense progress in terms of regulation. So we already have the right regulatory framework in place with AFIR, APBD, RED 3 on the e-mobility side, but also with the grid codes that are now, being discussed at the EU level, also in terms of type approval regulation. So all those, regulatory provisions that are needed are already there, or need to be implemented, or need to be further improved. Standardization is also on a very good pathway. We see ISO 15118-20, that is the key enabler of the ecosystem, on a good pathway. We already have a mandate from the EU Commission on the charging infrastructure. So starting with 1st of January 2027, for publicly accessible and private recharging points, we have a -20 mandate. And with the automotive package, actually within the automotive omnibus, we already see a pathway being opened for a possible ISO 15118-20 mandate on the OEM side, because that's also very important. Again, in alignment, the Commission can now adopt a delegated act to require communication standards on the vehicle side as well.
And it's also business cases as well, right? So policy is your wheelhouse. Like, policy is really very much what you live and breathe, as I can hear in your answers today. But there's also business cases. So how close or far away, once again, are we from the automakers and the charging point providers in terms of developing business cases for bidirectional charging?
Well, I think we're seeing, moving away from just concept. We're shifting to implementation, and we're already seeing, V2G commercial proposals being rolled out. I think it's very important to say that at times it feels that, regulatory frameworks have to keep up with innovation. That's also fair to say. We have a lot of examples in that space. I think with E.ON and BMW, that's a very concrete example that is being rolled out this year. The Mobility House together with Mercedes or other players, Renault, that you were also mentioning, in the Netherlands. In the UK, we also see Octopus with BYD. So a lot of commercial, proposals that are already out there with a lot of interesting incentives for the consumers as well, because I think that's also a part that has to be looked at in more detail, right? We have to incentivize the consumer to participate in the energy market, because I think we're moving in a more decentralized, energy system, and that also motivates, let's say, the consumers not to only consume, but be prosumers, so active participants in the energy system, and have very tangible benefits as well.
Yeah, indeed, and the Renault trial that you mentioned that we'll hear about is We Drive Solar in the Netherlands, and it is interesting to hear about all these cooperations between charging providers, between energy players, and the OEMs, the car makers themselves. Going back to regulation again, you said about how things are moving in the right direction in Germany. Double taxation was also one of the regulations that was really key to be reformed in Germany. This is kind of taxing as you charge and also as you discharge.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how significant is that reform?
I would say that was a game changer. It was a milestone, because that was one of the major hurdles in deployment of V2G at scale, and it was celebrated as a big policy win. But we're not only seeing Germany, making progress on that front. We're seeing other member states also moving forward into the same direction, with Italy, Spain, Sweden, France. But I think a more coordinated approach would be needed at the EU level, because we have the electricity tax directive that is still being stalled in the council. So a bit more action needed at the policy level, let's say, to harmonize that approach would be welcomed.
Okay, and to sum up kind of where we are at this moment, I think e-mobility, there was always a bit of a chicken and egg discussion, right? People, range anxiety. People were worried, are there enough charging stations? Should I get an EV? It feels like we've passed that threshold. Where are we in terms of bidirectional charging in the industry, in deployment in Europe right now?
I think it's very important to say that the industry is actively working on this, and also together with the policy stakeholders. Very important to say that we are currently working on developing a roadmap or a blueprint for deployment of V2G. We are working at the level of the European Commission we as Hubject are part of the STF, Sustainable Transport Forum, part of the joint subgroup on, it's going to be a bit more in detail, so governance standards and data. And we're working together with another subgroup under DG ENER that is called Data for Energy, plus what I mentioned before, Coalition of the Willing, the initiative that came from Germany. So very important to say that obviously different competencies in the EU Commission sit under different DGs, different Director General, so that also complicates a bit things in terms of alignment. But things have gotten much better now. So together, the STF, Data for Energy, and Coalition of the Willing are jointly coordinating on roles and responsibilities, on data needs, on standards and protocols that are needed for interoperability, on the use cases. So hopefully by April this year, we'll be able to publish a joint report that sets out basically, let's say, this blueprint that is needed for V2G deployment.
Okay, so I get the impression that things are moving quickly on the policy
Things
front.
are moving very quickly, I would say, yes.
And do you expect to see things moving from trial into commercial application? What kind of time frame? To put you right on the spot, Adriana.
Well, as I just said, we're not talking only about, trials and pilot projects. That was already, done in the past 2025. We also saw the Commission with the V2G sandboxes, regulatory sandboxes, offering, let's say, limited time and scope exceptions for deployment of V2G. But as I said, there's already, I think 2026 is already the year of deployment of, commercial proposals in this space that will be further accelerated, I expect, throughout the next years. So the challenge is now to move at speed and move at scale with the V2G solutions that are already there.
Wow. So we might look back at 2026 as being a kind of turning point for bidirectional charging.
Yes.
And we're going to hear about one of these promising trials that's really scaling from We Drive Solar in the Netherlands just after this. Adriana Fricke, Senior Manager Public Affairs for Hubject. Thank you very much for joining the
Thank you so much
podcast.
for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
Robin Berg is the CEO and founder of We Drive Solar. Robin, thanks for joining the Smarter podcast.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to speak to you today because we're talking about vehicle to grid, vehicle to home, often called vehicle to X, bidirectional charging. And We Drive Solar is rolling out a trial program or pilot programs. It's really at a big scale. So we're not talking about 1, 2, 5, 10 vehicles. We're talking about larger fleets of vehicles. And I think fleet is also an interesting word here that we'll explore in our conversation. We're also speaking in the chilly months of the year here in Europe. It's been a cold start to winter, which is also an interesting way that interacts with e-mobility. And there's a lot of kind of myths or misunderstandings about cold temperatures. Now, Robin, first of all, in these cold temperatures, how have you found the We Drive Solar program and fleet interacting with the grid, particularly with the temperatures well below zero?
Yeah, so we started this project, which is now indeed beyond the pilot phase, because we have been piloting for like 10 years with vehicle to grid. Last year, we rolled out the first medium-scale fleet of 50 cars together with the car share operator MyWheels. And they have the ambition to build the largest bidirectional fleet in Europe. So we are now scaling up to almost 200 cars in Utrecht and also 50 cars in the cities of Eindhoven, but also Amsterdam and Rotterdam will join this year. So this is now scaled up, and we are going to scale up the number of V2G activated cars from 50 to 500 in this quarter. So it's 10 times as large at the end of this quarter. And the reason why we do this is that we want to enable loads of storage for the renewable energy transition that is going at fast speed in the Netherlands and is causing huge amounts of grid congestion. Specifically in the region of Utrecht, you see that the grid operator is really having troubles, especially in the cold months, to get enough power available for everyone. So we are in a contract with the grid operator to test and validate if we can provide enough flexibility during cold periods to keep the lights on. That's basically the concept behind it. So we started with those 50 cars. We now have almost 200 cars available in Utrecht region on the roads. And what happened at the beginning of this month is that those cars were not driving anymore because we had a orange code orange in the Netherlands, specifically in Utrecht region. Don't go out to drive because it's dangerous and you get into an accident, because there were slippery roads everywhere. It was quite crazy. It really concentrated around Utrecht region. So we then decided, okay, if those cars are not being used for driving, and we are using them already as a flexibility asset on the grid, is this then extra? So basically, you have extra cars available right at the moment that you need them to solve possible grid congestion. And that proved out to be quite interesting. And we are already quite able to really push those cars at the right time to discharge and lower grid congestion with quite a lot of kilowatts and soon megawatts of power. So this is really a very interesting concept that's now being pushed into reality and is available out of the streets.
Well, when you mention grid congestion, it's not only a lack of generation or grid capacity when the temperatures are very low and there's not very much sunshine in the winter months. You've also seen some results that I've seen you publish from the local grid operator in terms of the summer months as well, when in the Netherlands you have a very high penetration of rooftop solar, I think the highest in Europe. So then we've got this excess solar flowing into the grid around midday. How are the cars that are participating in your program, this fleet of vehicles, able to tackle grid congestion in these kind of high solar production periods?
Yeah, so what's happening in the Netherlands is actually quite interesting. We are like in a kind of perfect storm, if you would call the energy transition like that.
Yeah, but a good storm, a friendly
And
storm.
it's a very good storm. But so what's happening in the Netherlands? We have three major trends happening at the same time, and they all pushed forward quite strongly. So we don't have the most solar panels in Europe. We have the most solar panels in the world per inhabitant, together with Australia. And although we don't have as much sun as Australia, the Dutch went completely crazy with solar. So we have now like 30 gigawatts of solar installed, while our country only uses 15 at its peak. So when the sun shines, we always have too much solar power. Not right now in January, but starting end of February and March, you will see the peaks going up again, and it's crazy. So we have a lot of days with too much solar energy. At the same time, we are within the front runner countries in the Netherlands regarding electric mobility. So 40% of our new sold cars are already fully electric. 80% of the sold cars are electrified. So we are there also in the front runner. So a lot of electric cars are coming to our roads, demanding charging facilities. And at the same time, and that's the third one, we had a huge gas reserve in the north of our country, but because of earthquakes in the past years, we had to shut it down within a few years. So also for heating and for industry, we also have to switch to electricity quite fast, as we don't want to rely on importing gas, fossil fuel. So, and this all happens in the same decade. It's just all happening at the same time. And our grid cannot cope with that. So the grid operators are investing, they're rolling out new infrastructure, but they have to do it everywhere at the same time. So, and that's what's causing huge grid congestion in the Netherlands, and in specific regions like Utrecht, it's even worse. I mean, in Utrecht alone, there are like 1,000 companies waiting for grid congestion or waiting for an upgrade of grid congestion. So it's like the economy is coming to a standstill. Housing projects are not being built. Solar panels on large roofs are not allowed to be plugged in anymore. So it's really holding back the rest of the energy transition and is causing huge problems. So to solve this, there are basically two solutions. For the short term, install small-scale gas turbines, or use batteries and other flexibility assets. And we think that if we are able to scale up bidirectional charging fast enough, And we're pushing for that very hard, and also working closely together with a lot of partners and also the national government to push for fast implementation of this technology. We think we can solve a huge part of this puzzle and help us get through this phase that the grid operator has time to upgrade the grid in the coming decades.
And when you've been able to show or demonstrate these results, this potential in cities like Utrecht, to the distribution system operator, to the grid operator, to the regulators, how are they reacting to the results from these fleets with bidirectional charging enabled?
Yeah, so the local grid operator here stayed in, but also the organization of Dutch grid operators on electric mobility, ELAT, they were already quite positive about the concept already from the start when we started with this like almost 10 years ago. They pushed for it, they funded it, so they really helped it developing, moving forward. We made all kinds of models together with the University of Utrecht and other researchers to validate. So they were very happy to see that when now it's actually getting in the real world with actual fleets and not just in a lab or a test with only a few cars, it actually proved to be right and it proved to be working. So it's not finished yet. We are still pushing forward to validate also at a larger scale and see if how much megawatts we can deliver, how much actual flexibility, how much actual problems are we solving. But the potential is huge. So we think that with like 10,000 bidirectional cars, you could solve the whole grid congestion in the region. And that's like as much as cars as every year are like renewed in this region. So basically, if everyone would buy a bidirectional electric car this year and just install a charger at their home or at their work or wherever they park, the grid congestion could be solved in 1 year. So that's the
Problem
potential.
solved.
Yeah. And we think this potential should be used.
Wow, it is enormous. Now, one thing that particularly enables the bidirectional program that you are rolling out or adopting or piloting at a very large scale is that these are fleet vehicles. These aren't for personal use. So this is a kind of ride sharing or car sharing.
Yeah,
car sharing program. Just explain, why is it that a fleet of vehicles in this way, car sharing, is particularly well suited to vehicle to grid functionality?
Yeah, so from the car share operator, mobiles, it's really logical thing to do. So they operate car sharing, they have to invest in vehicles, charging stations, blah, blah. And then the cars have to be used for driving, and they are being used. But when those cars are standing still and not making money for them, this is an opportunity. So they were looking at our concept and said, okay, well, our cars drive more than a privately owned car, but still they are standing still for like 70, 80% of the time, which is lower than 90, 95 for a private owned car. But still, this has a huge potential. So that's why they started working together with us. Can we make this whole fleet bidirectional? Because we can add extra value and also make some money when those cars are standing still, and make a better business case for electric car sharing, which is not an easy business case to do. So that was basically the main reason for our collaboration. And then also Renault came in as a very important partner, which we have been working together with for already 10 years to test and validate and develop bidirectional charging technology. And they said, okay, the Renault 5 is like perfect for car sharing. So let's see if we can roll out a large fleet of those cars in the Marius fleet, and let's see if we can work together on that. So this is how the partnership between the three partners then was formed. And up until now, this has been very successful. And in Utrecht alone, there will be a fleet of 500 Renaults in the Marius fleet doing bidirectional charging. And the great thing is that out of this fleet project, now Renault Netherlands has asked us also to roll out a vehicle to grid offer for anyone who buys a Renault. So starting this quarter, we will launch a proposition for anyone buying a Renault 5 or 4 or Alpine A290, and around summer also the Megane and the Scenic. And if they want to do bidirectional charging, they can sell a charger from our company, and we will add them to this virtual power plant of cars we are forming together with MyWheels. So this then becomes super interesting, because then you don't only have the fleet of MyWheels using it for flexibility services, etc., but also adding all those individuals and creating even much larger fleets.
Wow, it's a very kind of, you said it's been a long time in the making, but it seems very rapid for something that is cutting edge, really, vehicle to grid at this stage.
Yeah, we've been piloting for 10 years and have been waiting for the technology to be standardized, to have the right protocols, to have the technology investments also in the charger, but also having the cars available to roll out. Renault was the first one basically to put the technology in a cheap electric vehicle in the European market. And I think that was quite a bold step to do that, to make it available in the Renault 5 as the first car, and then now also the other models, including the Renault 4 already available. So I think that was a bold step, because now they are really showing that this is not an expensive technology for your luxury home. No, it's a technology that's part of a car that needs to bring electric driving to the masses.
And it also demonstrates that while something may seem very complicated, very kind of future-focused, futuristic, that once the conditions are there, things can really roll out very quickly.
Yes. Yeah. So to implement this, it was hard. It took a lot of time. But now we are getting at the point that we are going to scale. And basically, when we are going successfully through the coming months, there is no limit anymore to how much we could scale it to. Yeah.
Very exciting. Thank you very much, Robin Berg, for joining the Smartery podcast, and all the best with this next stage of your program at We Drive Solar.
Thanks.
This podcast is a Climate Copy production. Nicole Schäfer is our graphic designer, Ina Gorsen, Wolfgang Weicht, and Peggy Herter-Zille are our marketing team, and Matthew Denis is our editor. Be sure to follow, like, and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you've found us. Get in touch with feedback, comments, or suggestions at podcast@thesmartery.com. The Smartery takes place in Munich on June 22nd to the 25th this year, and I hope to see you there. I'm Jonathan Gifford, and thanks for joining me on the Smartery podcast.